Hello, everybody, and welcome to Positive Fandom. I am your host, Mmmm, and today we have Catherine Cooke with us today. How are you, Catherine?
All right.
Um, so I'm really excited to see this. Honestly, Catherine, you and I have been wanting to do this for a little while, but our my schedule got kind of messed up. But you were able to accommodate me this today, and there's so much to say about Andor because 12 episodes and there was a lot of stuff in it. It was incredible. For those of you who are watching, it is the new Star Wars series. And there is a lot to talk about. In particular, I think that, Cassian, this main character, who's about 30 to 40, would you say, is very pivotal in the rebellion. And the series was pushed back a few times. And I'm guessing, the last time might have been to allow for Kenobi to have more of a focus and get more attention. But nevertheless, it premiered with a 3-episode arc. And it had some mixed reviews, but a few of the concerns that people had about the show had to do with the pace and whether or not this was, like a Star Wars. Did the experience look and feel like a Star Wars show? So those are kind of things that I think after watching the show for me, I would say that the pace was perfect and the show felt like Star Wars overall. What did you think, Catherine, about the pace and the feeling, the setting of this show? Did it feel like Star Wars to you?
It definitely felt like Star Wars. It shows that you can have a place for two different types of storytelling. You can have The Mandalorian, which is built more around episodic and cameos and stuff like that. And then you can have something which is a lot more in depth into the nitty gritty of real storytelling, where you can have long character arcs, a lot of character depth, and spend a lot of time just building tension. So I liked the slow burn approach up to a point. The only time where it really bugged me was the middle storyline for the heist, because it felt like for all the time that Andor spends with that crew of thieves in episodes 4, 5, and 6, that they don't really talk about much, and it didn't feel like there was as much tension there, even though they don't trust him. I felt there could have maybe been a little more tension there, because all told, through those 3 episodes before the heist, he probably spends 40, 45 minutes with them, at least on screen, and that just felt like a bit long. Like I was waiting for it to kind of, it's like, okay, what's going on here? And then the fact that most of them all died in the heist was a bit anticlimactic after all that, hanging around. But that was the only time the pacing really bugged me. I'm probably in the minority in that I really liked the first 2 episodes. I hear a lot of people kind of bagging on it, but I liked how they kind of did this slow introduction to the series. Uh, and so yeah, I thought the pacing throughout was pretty well done.
Okay. And that is interesting. When we start with this first episode, Andor is trying to find his sister. And, I think that, this is our first introduction. And it starts off kind of dark and gloomy with the lights, but I kind of think that that visualization of him going to every corner of the galaxy to try to find her was quite poignant because this is what he's doing on his spare time when he can do it, going anywhere he can to try and find her, even in a brothel, essentially, which is where a woman was at. So that's something to think about. And we also get a sense of him as a character. He owes money to people. He's jumping in and out of people's beds. He's a lethargo. There's a jealous boyfriend scenario. And he still seems to have some cred with I think it's Bix, who, still for him. She cares for him. There's a lot of people who care about Andor, Catherine. I think it's very interesting. And it's true, Andor didn't have the best situations, but it seems like a lot of kind people have come his way. What do you think about the fact that he has had these people who have kind of given him second and third? Marva kind of rescued him from a planet that was, like a dead planet, if you will, with all the mining and everything. And, perhaps the women in his life and even his friends who he owes money to seem to, with the exception of one, seem to kind of say, okay, he owes me money and I know he'll pay me back, but they're still kind of on talking terms. Is it a coincidence these people, or is that the people he's encountered in these situations are just so kind that they're letting a lot of what he's doing wrong slide?
Well, I guess they like him, but the series doesn't spend any time whatsoever developing his relationships with any of these people to really showcase what the reason is. Like, so I guess they just like him. I mean, other than Marva, it's like you can see he has a friendship with Bix, but because it's so plot oriented for what's going on like in the now, it's like you don't really get any depth to any of that stuff. So it's like, yeah, you could tell they like him, but he sort of flies under the radar throughout his own series. Like even in the finale, I remember when we last talked, you had the prison break and Luthen giving that great speech, and I mentioned that, wow, what's really great about this series is that you just have no idea which direction it's going to go. And then, I figured that since they went back to Ferrex, this is where those relationships you mentioned are going to really come back, and we're going to find out some. Remember, we're going to find out about his sister finally. Find out about what was the big deal about his homeworld and why was Marva so terrified of the Empire. But then they didn't revisit any of that stuff, and I thought he was kind of a bystander in the climax. So, on the one hand, in the beginning of the series, it made sense that they established he has these types of friendships with people, and I thought we would learn more about why when it went on. Like, is it because they like him so much? Is it because there's something else going on? But they never really revisited that. And it's funny because I thought Bix was going to be one of the main characters in the show. I mean, she seemed to be advertised quite a lot and prominently featured even on the poster, but she wasn't really a big player in it very much. And so when Andor finally gets back around to Ferrex, he kind of he's there, and his friends are willing to help him. Even the guy in the junkyard who told him off at the beginning of the season, like, I'm going to let you go this time, and I never want to see you again. But when he comes back later, he's still willing to help him. So they do like him. So I think it might just be that he's that likable and that helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. It is something to think about. And I'm sorry, there's a little leak where I'm at here. That's very unusual. I apologize. So we also get to see artificial intelligence in the show. And of course, Star Wars is known for its droids. This B2EMO character, I didn't get the name correct. He is really sweet, and he makes you kind of fall in love with him. What did you think about the introduction to the droid and how he was treated as a character? We know that he's known Andor since he was 10, since Andor was 10. And, think about how they decided to allow this droid to pretty much be part of the family in the series.
I like that because this is the first time that a droid has actually been treated like family instead of just the friend or the Swiss Army knife, and so, or the smart aleck like with K2SO, and so you could tell that B2 is an actual family member and even behaves like one. Like he seems to have almost like emotions, if I would push it that far. So that was neat to see the first.
And of course, Andor gets into this, kerfuffle where he ends up killing these two guards in the first episode. And the agency that's in charge, those guards, they don't want to have any investigation. They want this all covered up. They want it to be over. And of course we have this very ambitious, I guess for hire Century guard whose name is Cyril, who is like, it's not over. I've got to continue doing this. And we know that his boss is saying, hey, we can't deal with this now. Trust me, you don't want to get involved in this. And I have to almost wonder, we know Cyril wants to go higher up in the ranks. I don't really know whether he could really ever go higher up in the ranks with that guard post, because it's just a bunch of guys who are, guards, and, there is no real future for them perhaps. But, what we're really seeing in the episode, at least seemed to be, was this time. It's an excellent time to sort of like become a rebel because there are positions available. It's an excellent time maybe to break into the Empire. Are we getting the sense of that, let's say the Cyril character, the Deidre character, maybe even Vel, they all think that they're going to be able to rise higher up in these positions? Are these unfounded beliefs, or is there really opportunity for them? Are they kind of banking on something, getting something out of it that is an unrealistic expectation?
Well, for Cyril, as we've discussed in the last couple episodes, it's unrealistic because he's a psycho stalker type personality. He's not going to rise through the ranks. That story for him is not going to end well. Clearly not. But for her, she's obviously been favored a lot by her boss, the former Admiral Yularen, and so I think she could possibly go places, but based on how she ends up at the end of this season, maybe not. It's kind of up in the air as to whether or not he's going to kill her. Whether the stalker Cyril is going to kill her or not, but because I'm not really sure where, because she's kind of brought her investigation back to a head when we get to the finale. It's like she had all the pieces right there and she failed, and the Empire isn't very forgiving of those things. So and plus she's now, been spared by Cyril, so it's like we'll see where that goes. But I definitely don't picture him climbing up through the ranks, but her maybe.
Mm-hmm. And so, we also end up with these scenes on Kenari, and as we spoke before, they're not translated. But we do get a lot of clues. They're sort of living off of hand-me-downs. There's a mining disaster. Um, Overall, from Chandrila and their custom, with what they do politically and socially, to on Ferrix, where they have that system where they communicate with the music and the clanking, so to speak. And also in Kenari, which, as I mentioned before, we could see how they were communicating, but they didn't translate. And even in Aldhani, where they had the cultural expression during that famous Stellar event, it was a huge undertaking. There was a lot of cultures. How do you think they did overall in season 1, depicting a lot of these cultural significant things in the series?
A pretty good job. I mean, they didn't really get to see much from any of them because, again, the plot was always front and center a bit. Like with it was kind of funny that on the Aldhani one specifically, it's that we didn't even find out about this ceremony or this festival or this culture until the last of those 3 episodes. When we first meet, they're like, yeah, they're hiding. The rebels are initially hiding out at this abandoned village. But I remember when I read the description for the 3rd episode on Disney, for the 6th episode, the 3rd one in that arc on Disney Plus, and it mentions that they're going to use the cover of this great celebration ceremony. I'm like, what are you talking about? And then it just kind of springs upon you, and I'm like, oh, so there's a culture of people here. Okay, but it didn't spend as much time with it. And then on Ferrix, okay, you could tell they're bound against the Empire, but they didn't really dive into the meaning of any of those things. But it's kind of neat.
Well, another thing that I have to ask and was curious about is, what's the general level of intelligence of ordinary people, for example, let's say on Ferrix versus Aldhani, when it comes to what's going on with the Empire? Because it seems like the people in Ferrix are really well informed, but have an advantage over some of the other worlds due to their work. What do you think? Seems like there's been a lot of discussion, maybe more chatter about what the Empire is doing, but I imagine that the people at Ferrix might know more, since that's the place you go for very special items. Do they know more?
Yeah, that, and then the fact that what is it, the chieftain or whatever on Aldhani, I can't remember what he said, but he was kind of like a smartass to the Imperial officer, showing that, hey, we know what's up, but they're kind of have some tempestuous relationship with them. Whereas on Ferrix, because they are a bit more technologically advanced, they're listening in on the radio, they know what's going on. So yeah, they're more in the know, I guess.
Is he really making his own decisions in his life, or is he just pawns of a bigger game?
Who?
Andor.
Andor? Yeah, he's not really making any decisions. It's like people are kind of like he stole that Starpath thing because he wanted to sell it and just make some money. He had no interest in joining the rebellion, but because they got ambushed, he got sucked into it, and then he got bribed with another job. He's like, ooh, more money. But that's kind of what was driving him for a while, and it's not really until even when he gets caught and he goes to jail, he's kind of stuck there, and that's kind of when he starts, to me, making decisions for himself. He's like, no, we're not going to stay here in this prison. We're going to break out. And then he's the one who keeps really shepherding that and is ultimately responsible for the breakout. So that's like the first time I felt where he's not just being bribed or talked into doing something. He's actually taking a stand. He's like, no, this is what we're doing, and we're doing it. And then in the finale, when he decides to go back to Ferrix for the funeral to try and help his friends, that's also him finally making a decision to actually do something instead of following everybody else's lead.
And early on, we do see some sexual situations in the show, and kind of seeing how these sexual situations are treated, with Bix speaking to Tim, and it's obvious they wanted us to know they had an intimate relationship. That was very clear. Talk about anything, she just wanted to get it on. And of course, we see that the implications are not the fact that she was with him. That wasn't good enough to convince Tim that she still has feelings for Cassian, which is fine. I mean, she might have feelings for him for the rest of her life. So this is maybe something he can't overcome. But what do you think about the treatment of situations in the show. Is it appropriate for the show? Do you think it was just the right amount? It didn't overpower anything to me, but they felt it had to be significant enough to show in the series. What did you think of it?
Yeah, it fit the tone of the show, and the fact that this is not, again, it's not like a kiddie type show. It doesn't have the attention. It doesn't support the attention span of most young kids. So it's fine. It's handled well enough. Whatever. I like you said, it also was there. I like that it was also there for a reason. It wasn't just gratuitous, like you said. It was there to establish her relationship with Tim, so you could see what he was going to do next. And it's like, oh, okay, I see what he's all about. What that's going. So I thought that actually it like served a purpose. Like even when you see that Andor has like a living girlfriend on that planet at the beach house, it's like it's part of his cover. He's just like a tourist. He's like, hey, I'm a tourist. We're just hanging out type of thing. So it does play to its strengths. So though I do admit, as far as the question of what's appropriate or not, the fact that the first scene of this show is at a brothel, which is a first for Star Wars, it's like it tells you right off the bat that
That's
this
right.
is going to be a more adult show, and I like that. It's like, ooh, that Disney is giving them a bit of a longer leash with this, and I like that. Kind of like they did with Marvel in the second Guardians movie, where the what's his name, the Michael Rooker character was at the brothel, and it's like, and clearly putting his clothes back on because he's just got it on with the the lady in there, and it's like, oh, okay. So so that was, I guess, used in the beginning for as like a signal that no, this is not your average Star Wars show. We're doing something more mature and different, and I thought it was done very well.
Yeah, and I'm glad they had that in there too, because I think we have seen I feel like we need to see a more adult version of what's going on in the universe. And we also saw in season 1, and salvaging is not new in Star Wars. Like, it's not new. But we also saw stealing more or less on Ferrix. When I say stealing, I mean ships parking on Ferrix and pieces suddenly going missing. A lot of stuff like that. How much of the commerce that goes through Ferrix do you on theft versus salvage? And do you think Ferrix will continue to be sort of like the center of operations since we see the Empire has a tighter hold on it now?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, because clearly the guy who runs the junkyard had a problem with Andor because a lot of the stuff he brings is like stolen. He's like, I don't want to get caught up in this, because he's paranoid about getting caught, but you could tell that's kind of how the economy of their city really works. Kind of like when they all had that secret analog alarm system. Like, they're used to it. Like, they didn't just have that for the hell of it. Like, they know that we got to hide what we're really doing here. And so when the Empire shows up, you could tell that most of what they were doing must be based on illegal activities, because that it doesn't take very long. I think it's this show takes place over the course of like a year or something. They didn't do a good job at really establishing the time jumps or whatever, but when they get fed up with it pretty quickly and decide to rebel against it. And that's because, hey, our operations are based on things which are, and technically salvaging it could maybe be illegal as well. Like, the Empire's like, you need a permit or something like that. So yeah, I think it's more of an illicit. I will tell you one thing. I would have much preferred to have spent a lot more time with the people and all the characters on Ferrix than all the time we spent hanging out with the rebel group on Aldahani, like waiting for that heist. Like, I would have much preferred, because it seems like there's an entire like underground organization going on Ferrix, and you only get to scratch the surface of it because the story takes off, like leaves that planet so quickly. Even when the Empire does arrive and we meet another Imperial officer who's excited about the prospects of moving up in the ranks and put in charge of the garrison, I'm like, oh, this is going to lead somewhere. And then it doesn't. The story kind of departs Ferrix again. And so it's like, I would have liked to spend more time there with all these, with this world that they established.
I agree. I think that Ferrix is an incredible, we certainly are told right from the very beginning that if you can't find it on Ferrix, it's not worth finding, more or less. I'm paraphrasing, but I like that we have that character actor who meets Luthen, and we're kind of introduced to Luthen. He comes across as being a mysterious figure. But even the guy in the transport on that, from the transport, I guess, from the space hub to the planet, knows Luthen isn't ordinary as far as I'm concerned, despite the fact that Luthen's kind of hiding in the shadows. Does Luthen have better success on Coruscant, keeping up his ruse alive, versus a place like Ferrix where I think they could read him better? What do you think?
Yeah, easily, because all the people on Coruscant, for the most part, are like Mon Mothma's husband. They're kind of greedy and conceited and arrogant, and they're not really able to see what's going on. They're kind of dimwits, frankly. Whereas places on Ferrix based on how their entire economy gets by, all of their analog security. Yeah, they could read them in a second.
And we see a bunch of times where we get suspenseful trying with suspenseful real-time events, where Marva finds Cassian on Makari. I think that's the home planet. But we also see a point where she's taking him away to safety. And then we see a similar situation where Luthen is now taking Cassian safety. We also saw that in The Mandalorian quite a bit. Do you think, why do you think they decided? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think there's a little slight difference there. Like Marva, you could tell she genuinely cared about Cassian and wanted to help him, whereas with Luthen, he sees something that he can get out of him, and he didn't want him to get shot, which is why he helps him escape. As evidenced by the fact that no sooner than he's used Andor for the heist, he already wants to kill him, even though in a way it's not really his idea. It's like his whatever his assistant's name is in the shop is the one who keeps pushing that, So yeah, whereas Marva I felt was more caring and like had more altruistic motives.
Yeah, certainly. You are absolutely right. I compared it to The Mandalorian because we saw a scene where, Din remembers when he was rescued by another Mandalorian. And of course, we see Grogu being rescued by a Mandalorian in present day. So that was what I thought was very interesting. We had seen a lot of flashbacks in some of these we'd been getting, and the flashbacks weren't necessarily something that fans enjoyed. I think that this type of approach, or at least the way that they did it in Andor, was pretty perfect, and it got the point across. Two very pivotal moments of his life, meeting Marva, and then of course meeting Luthen, which would change his life going forward. But soon after that, we find out that there's this planned heist. Now, what's interesting about this heist, at least to me, is that you and I both know it would have failed without Andor. I believe it would have failed without Andor. Honestly, have they, meaning the rebels led by Luthen, failed in the past, do you think, for some of they're desperate to get Andor because of maybe past failures?
I'm not really sure, actually, because somehow because Andor wanted to sell this thing, and Bix finds the contacts. Oh, Luthen might be interested in buying it, but it turns out he's not interested in buying it. He's just interested in him, and it does take some convincing on his part to get Val to accept Andor as part of their new troop. And even then, as we see in those middle three episodes, the rest of the crew on Aldahani don't really trust Andor that much. So I'm not really sure if it was failures or what, because because we do find out that Mon Mothma was surprised and a bit upset to learn that these resources were being used to steal the Imperial payroll, which she thought was too big of a job. Oh, we're going to get caught type of thing. So I don't get the sense that they've done anything really big before this. Maybe they have failed. So it could go either way. I don't know. But the fact that, that Luthen lets himself get talked into the idea of killing Cassian so easily, then it sounds like he, on the one hand, he recognizes Andor's potential for that job, but he doesn't seem to recognize his potential for being in the rebellion at large yet. I think he will, given the finale of the series, or not of the series, but of the season, going from there. But
yeah, it's a good point. And during the heist, we get introduced to this manifesto, which I hope they will actually publish. Someone will make an audiobook of the manifesto. I'd like to see something like that. But what I'm curious about is at the end of the show, when Marva gives her speech, I'm almost wondering whether she has a manifesto. I mean, is this a thing of the Star Wars era as well, since there is so much pushback from the Empire upon what, planet you're from? Are there a lot of these manifestos out there? And do you think Martha had one? Because we know she's been a rebel all along, right?
Well, it seems like that was her manifesto. It was just something, shorter. But I do agree that I think the other manifesto that they teased with that character in Aldahani is going to come back at some point, because Andor kept it, and so I think that is also going to help contribute, as well as the events of the finale are going to help contribute to pushing him over to deciding that, okay, I'm not just going to use the rebellion for my own ends anymore. I'm actually going to join at some point. So I think it will come back.
And we talked about development in Dedra and Cyril, and how they did such a great job in establishing the connection between the two of them. Obviously, first, it's because she's doing this investigation. And, we've discussed in the past that honestly, it's not necessarily the best thing for her to be associated with him, because she's trying to rise up through the ranks, and any association with a failure could really hurt her. We also see a lot of interesting character development for Vel, who suddenly becomes badass during the heist, but she struggles against Luthen when he makes her take Andor on to join the team. And then later we notice that her love interest doesn't necessarily value her like she thought it was going to be. And once she about, the character not being interested in her, she seems very lost, even so much so that she confronts, she wants to find out if there's another reason, honestly, as to why this whole thing is the shakedown, or at least the loss of this girl is happening to her. And she goes to Clea, trying to figure out, well, did Luthen, this is what I'm thinking, he might have told Siska something, and Clea, Vel thinks that that's the reason why the girl doesn't want to be with her anymore. But she's trying to figure out what she can do to get this girl back. I mean, what do you think brought Vel to this situation in the first place? Do you think that Vel was the one that got Mon Mothma involved, or do you think it was the other way around? Because it's a coincidence that these two cousins are involved in, this rebellion. How do you think the association with Luthen came into play? Was it Mon Mothma, or was it?
I have no idea, because they didn't give enough clues one way or another. And with Luthen, there's still so much mystery. Even when he gave that huge speech, he could just be talking, blowing smoke. There's really no way to know anything with him. And with her, I mean, I get the sense that Mon Mothma well, we know she was there from the beginning, because the deleted scenes in Revenge of the Sith where she participates with Padme with starting the rebellion, like in Padme's office, before the Empire is even declared a thing. But we don't really know the story of these cousins, and I take it that maybe from their association with Mon Mothma or knowing her, they just kind of got roped into it. We really don't know yet, which is one of my other frustrations with the show. They spent so much time, because long-form TV, you got to really give them something. It's like, like one of my big frustrations with Bad Batch was that they started out with this intriguing mystery, which is, why did the Kaminoans create this Omega clone? Like, what's the purpose? And then for the next 15 episodes, they drag it out and give you nothing else with a bunch of filler. And I felt kind of like that way with this series too. Like, because the thing, when you're doing a long form show, understandably, when there's multiple seasons, storylines continue, arcs are left unresolved, but each season still has a complete story. And I didn't feel this season did have a complete story. Each of the things just kind of goes on. Like, I remember you predicted accurately that the marriage thing with the Mon Mothma's daughter, that way of getting the money, is probably going to go through. And we're seeing how that's starting to happen. But even that is just like the next step in something. It didn't feel like that any of the storylines in the season had a real conclusion. It just kind of, I mean, after episode 10, where I'm like, man, this is exciting. Where are we going to go? Episodes 11 and 12 felt to me like the bridge to the finale rather than the finale. It just kind of ended. I'm like, oh, okay. And so the fact that with all those scenes at Mon Mothma's offices and stuff, and we're seeing how she's concerned about how to hide the money. We see she's got the cousins involved, and they didn't. I felt they should have given us something towards the end, and they never really did, which is why I'm kind of up in the air as to like these valid questions, like who do we think got who involved first? And I don't feel they really gave us enough. And for a long form series, you have so many scenes, spent so much time there, and it's like I didn't feel there was much of a payoff to that storyline in the first season. Even Andor, who, I mean, I get it. They named the show Andor because he's the returning legacy character. But he's, for the most part, is kind of in the shadows in the finale of the show, even when the big rebellion happens. And so everything just kind of, it's like they tried to tease a finale by trying to bring all the storylines on Ferrix, but then it doesn't, none of the storylines really have, and by conclusion, I don't mean that a dead stop, but it feels like you get to a real, like, for instance, the prison break. Obviously, that's not the end of the story, but that feels like a conclusion to like a big arc. Wow. I didn't feel the series had that overall. So like coming out of the season, asking all these valid questions, like who's on whose side, who got who involved, why is Luthen's assistant at the shop at the antique shop so interested in getting Cassian killed, and yet nowhere do we provided enough clues for that. And I didn't find that was very great writing for long form TV. It just, because the season didn't leave me scrambling for the next episode, because we're not getting season 2 until early 2024, I believe. So I was like, yeah, I love all the build up to everything and how they're really reeling us in, but I felt that if you're not going to resolve any of the storylines in the first season, you got to give us a little bit more to play with, to think about going forward. And I just don't feel it really did that, which is why I'm kind of in the dark for a lot of these questions.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot with these questions. I just,
Oh no, it's fine. I'm just mentioning that to me that I found that was one of the big criticisms I have for the show, even though I still love it for what it's doing, that level of maturity that Disney is allowing them to have. So I do like that they have taken this step, and I do think that the quality of this series has everything to do with the fact that this was a British production. Like like Tony Gilroy got veteran writers and directors of long form TV shows who know how to do this stuff. They didn't rely on the volume, and it's not that the volume is a problem. I thought it was used well in the first couple seasons of Mandalorian, but with the visual effects industry under strain right now, it didn't do it. It was pretty bad in Book of Boba Fett and Obi-Wan. It really showed. So they're like, let's step away from that, and we'll like step back from CG and do it all for real. And you really feel that. And I think all of that stuff just really elevates it. So I hope in the future Lucasfilm has more Star Wars productions done over in the UK, because I think that has a lot to do with the quality being better.
I agree with you 100%. I think that, for a long time, what we've been seeing in a lot of these series, in addition to the subpar writing and in addition to the subpar, and I'm sorry, but production was subpar in some of the situations of the previous series. We also aren't seeing what I call unforced errors, where, and when I say that, what I mean is it's stuff that should be corrected, but they didn't bother doing it. For example, the de-aging of Anakin in the Kenobi series. We know that he should have been de-aged, and someone did it on the internet, some wonderful person, and did it manually when they did the Kenobi movie, the Patterson cut. But I noticed that in the official release, he doesn't look like a young, boy or a young man, even in his 20s, maybe mid to early 20s. So that was strange. And also,
yeah, it's funny. I was on a stream this morning where it was theorized that a lot of the budget for Kenobi probably went into bringing Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen back, which I wouldn't be surprised, because especially with Ewan, big movie star, that's going to fetch a lot of money, because everything else just looked so subpar, which was unfortunate,
Yeah, and another example that's not CGI related is what I like to call I'm going to hide you under my trench coat scene, where we know that even if they did shoot that scene, even if they did shoot that would have gone, like, that would have been cut out, right? They just would have cut it out. They would have appeared on the platform. They could have done anything to show. He could have hidden her using some special force power we haven't seen. Something could have been done. Didn't have to be done that. Now, we know that would have ended up not on the cutting room floor, but just it wouldn't have ended up in the final cut. And that might have been in a deleted scene years from now, where we could kind of laugh and say, oh, they were going to put that in there. That's crazy, but it would just be one of those funny deleted scenes that we could kind of laugh at. And so, that was very deliberate to leave it in. And so I call it an unforced error, because it was a mistake, and nobody to leave it in there. It was something they did that was, didn't really help the series. And so that was too bad that some of the series have suffered from that. But they were smart enough in Andor to make sure things didn't always go to plan for the characters. We saw the heist wasn't perfect. Neither was the, Andor's trip to where he thought he was going to enjoy himself. I can't even remember. Oh, he was going to the store, right, to pick up some snacks or something. And that's when he gets arrested and in prison, right? And even Mon Mothma's situation, a woman who has all the resources in the galaxy to her, hoping that her friend Tay would loan her the cash, right? Was hoping that he would come through with this, only for her to have to borrow from a gangster and, have to make a deal with her daughter, who almost doesn't even seem to mind, ironically. Is there just the right element of risk that's being taken here? Or could they have gone a little bit further in some of these instances? Because and I know you said during the heist, a lot of the character side, but many of the other characters in this story are still alive. Yeah. For example, Bix, who I thought would die. I thought this was it for her, but she managed to survive. I still think she's been brainwashed, but that's just my theory. Did they do the right amount, or should they have gone further with some of this?
I think further, because as I mentioned before, a lot of the storylines were kind of dilly-dallying along, like the amount of time Andor spends trying to win over the other thieves for the Albahani heist, and then the amount of time we spend with Mon Mothma having these very repetitive meetings, which granted it is going to be repetitive, and I like that they feature that. But if you're going to do that much repetition, you got to have some real payoff, which is why I thought when they teased the dinner with Sly Moore, I'm like, ooh, that's going to be a great scene. And I thought that was going to be juxtaposed against the heist. And it's like, oh, this is going to be great. And then they just drop it entirely and it's not even addressed. I'm like, oh, and it's like you can keep. So I think they could have gone farther with some of these things to make it a little bit more juicy. Like I mentioned earlier, the Bix character I thought was going to get a lot more screen time and be a much bigger character in the series. And then she wasn't because this show, unfortunately, was in a hurry to get off Ferrix and go to other places. So yeah, I think they could have gone a little farther. But then sometimes you have other characters like the Andy Serkis character, where Kino, where they give you just enough information that all you need to know about him. And I think in that situation, it's good that we don't know his backstory. Like we kind of get that he's accepted the fact that he's in this prison, whether it was for good reasons or not. He doesn't really care anymore. He's just, I'm a strict. Everybody's gonna be on it. All the ducks are gonna be in a row. And then when it finally dawns on him how much this has been a farce, and it's like that gives you just enough all you need. But in other instances, yeah, they think they could have pushed it a bit further.
Yeah, I was thinking that myself. And, I didn't say anything about this, but clearly the performances that we've had in this series from the obviously the production crew, that droid, which seems like he's alive, the incredibly satisfying part where the salvage worker and Ferrix attaches some kind of junk onto the transport so that when that guy flies his ship, the ship crashes. There are so many satisfying things that you would expect to see in the series, and it just feels really good to see cool things like that in the series. But the performances from the actors, where there's that beautiful moment at the end, or in the last episode, where he walks up to Andor and tells him what Martha said, her last word, so to speak, was just, obviously Andy Serkis's performance. Probably, if I don't know who else could have played that role. I mean, that character was so pivotal in this story, especially for Andor, that if we didn't have that character, I don't know whether the series would have worked. But, I was just kind of curious in regards to the heist, and I question a little bit earlier. How much did this heist really hurt the Empire? Was it more sort of like the ego hurt or a breach of security rather than taking the money that hurt the Empire in this sense?
That's a good question, because we didn't really hear about. I mean, they did steal the quarterly payroll, which is a lot of money, but you never really hear about how that hinders the Empire, or if it does at all. It's just like it's the ego, and it's the fact that we can't let this get out. That, oh, look how easy it is to steal from the Empire. It was that kind of thing. Like they need to put their best foot forward at this point, because that storyline again was unresolved. It was about we need to steal the payroll, but well, what'd you do with the money? Well, we don't know. It's like they move, because then they move on to the next thing with Saw Gerrera and the I can't remember the guy's name, the other character they're trying to rope in. It's like, and that doesn't really have anything to do with the quarterly payroll. It's like it's like, okay, you've been building up this big heist, this big job from really the first episode when Bix told Cassian, I got a contact for you, and he's like, okay, you wanted to lure in Andor for this huge heist. You gave him this Kyber crystal, which may or may not have been a prized possession. That could have just been a bluff that he said to earn Andor's trust. To steal this payroll, and what happened to it exactly? Well, we're not really sure. The only after effects we see are Mon Mothma having to cover up the cost that she's been embezzling and such. So I'm not really sure what where that really goes. I mean, yes, we get that the theft of the payroll provokes a lot more tyranny from the Empire, which was the point. But what did he actually do with the money? Because he could also use that to finance more rebel cells. And we don't hear how the Empire just decides to respond by, oh, we're going to press our feet down on everybody's necks now to get, revenge and get everybody back in line. It's like, okay. But even because at the end of Ferrix, it didn't feel to me like the robbery had anything to do with why because the people on Ferrix were running a pretty good operation, and it felt to me like they were primed to rebel at some point anyhow. Like even if the Imperial garrison hadn't been placed there, if Marva dies and still wants that speech being played, they're going to turn against the security in that case, so yeah, that could have maybe been handled a little bit better.
Yeah. And, Cyril ends up getting this job at the Bureau of Standards, and it puts him in a certain position to still make inquiries into what is going on with the Andor investigation or identifying persons of interest. Who do you think Cyril's uncle might be that they could get him a job right in an agency that seems to do investigations?
I'm not sure because they didn't really spend much time on him. It was just like a nepotism thing. Like he didn't seem to, the uncle didn't seem to recognize the significance of the case that Cyril was working. He's just like, oh, here, I'll get you this job and blah blah blah. Here's your station, and then he just kind of leaves like a throwaway character. It's like okay, he just got it. It was kind of like a plot armor, if you will, that gets into that position.
Well, we've seen during the heist, and let's say the crew of rebels, one of the members gets killed by Andor because he kind of threatens Andor in a sense. But we know that cooperation in getting this entire rebel to happen, is essential in making things work. Certainly, Andor learned to cooperate with everybody for the heist and a lot of the other things that he's doing. But in regards to Clea, what do you think will happen to her as the person who she claims has followed Luthen from the very beginning, the longest, but she seems to other members? I mean, will she accept Cassian after there's already been like this death notice on him, or will she be as abrasive with him as she's been with Vel?
Well, she was the one who's now Clea's the shop girl, right? The assistant. Well, she was the one who was pushing for Luthen to kill Cassian from the beginning for whatever reason. So there might be something to that. But again, they don't give us any other information on her. For all the time they spend in that shop, no other clues, so I have no idea. But she wants him dead. That's pretty clear.
Yeah, and I think it's very funny at the end is that the opposite of what's happened. The recruitment happened, but then the opposite of getting rid of him has happened. Where I think both you and I agree that Luthen is not going to kill Andor. He's going to take him in and maybe become Luthen's right-hand man. We don't know, but Andor isn't sort of just saying, I want to, work from 9 to 5. I think he's all in on this. And I think that Clea feels she's the most all-in person. And I think that will also cause tension. But Tay is the person who is the banker, who's the childhood friend of Mon Mothma. And honestly, he seems to know a lot of secrets when it comes to the Empire. He was very clear to Mon Mothma that he's not happy being associated with the Empire. And he's pretty much told her that he doesn't want to have to do with the Empire. Will this situation, the fact that Mon Mothma is kind of defying the Empire by working with this gangster, she's accepted that, will Tay distance himself from her? And will this gangster now kind of become super close with Mon Mothma and take over the role so Tay has had in her life going forward, do you think?
Well, I don't think this arrangement with the gangster is going to go well, because at some point she leaves Coruscant to go live on Yavin 4 with the rest of the rebels. So this is going to blow up in her face at some point. I don't think Tay is a spy for the Empire, as some have suggested, because, again, if he knew, the amount of information he knows already would be more than enough to turn her in for treason. So, and maybe he does go with her there. We don't know, because, just because we don't see him on Yavin 4 in the Rebellion doesn't mean he wasn't there. So I do think that this gangster thing is going to blow up in her face. I don't think her daughter and her husband are going to be with her anymore when she's full-blown in the Rebellion. I think that's all going to end badly.
All right. And Narkina 5 really is a very important part in the story. I didn't see it coming from anywhere. I didn't know Andor was going to get arrested, kind of like just randomly arrested. And not only are we seeing that, but we're also seeing the frustration that comes from this Empire overreach, so to speak. Don't necessarily feel safe with what's going on in Coruscant. Of course, the prisoners in Narkina 5 are, being brainwashed and are essentially being conditioned to do this work or else they get electrocuted. Even the people in Ferrix are thinking about what's going on and keeping an eye. For example, they've mentioned a few times about, or at least in one of the episodes where they said, we haven't seen the Blues for a while. So they are keeping, their eyes and ears open on what's going on. And to be honest with you, I know the show has implied that not a lot of people know what's going on in Narkina 5, but assuming that the Empire, that this has been happening for maybe more than what we see, it took time to build that thing on Narkina 5. That didn't happen overnight. How many people do know about these imprisonments and what the Empire is doing in the galaxy, because they almost implied that people were very surprised. You're on Namos, you're on a planet where people are going for pleasure and having fun, and they're arresting people who are as tourists, people with money, wealthy people who may not necessarily be keeping up on, galaxy events. But do the senators know what's going
No,
on? And
no, they clearly don't know what's going to happen because Palpatine's the whole purpose of the Death Star project is just to plant the Senate so that he doesn't have to use them anymore or collaborate with them. So they have no idea what's going on.
Okay, that's very interesting. So they are as much in the dark as everyone else. And then it is fair enough to say that the average person in the galaxy just doesn't know what's happening. But I also noticed that there's a lot of symbolism in the show, and I know people call them Easter eggs. That 5 prison is shaped like the symbol of the Empire. What are some of the other things that you personally noticed in the series that reminded you of other Star Wars things that we've seen as cool looking, let's say, as the Narkina 5 prison?
Well, like Luthen's ship bears a bit of a similar design to the cockpit, such as the Millennium Falcon, which is kind of interesting. And honestly, not much else. They really steered away from iconic Star Wars symbolism because they wanted it. They're taking us to new corners of the galaxy, making it feel very real. Other than say on Narkina 5, also when they're assembling those pieces of the Death Star, and when they move the pieces down the hall kind of has the same shape, and it looks like the TIE fighter wing, like it's going down a dark hallway, and you have all the crisscross things going down. It looks like, oh, that's kind of neat. But really, I didn't pick up on much other, iconic Star Wars symbolism throughout the series. It felt very fresh and different.
Now, we had talked about, or at least one of the things that I was always concerned about was how Andor was going to be, become a rebel officially, or at least decide that he was going to take his path and like make that decision, as you and I have discussed. And I had said I didn't want it to be something that happened instantaneous because it would be ridiculous. It couldn't be a cliche type of experience. And for me, this kind of reminded me of, he went through sort of like a V is for, maybe it wasn't like V is for Vendetta, but at the end of that, the character is completely fine with sacrificing themselves for the cause. And, they don't care after that experience of being held hostage or, whatever the situation was, they were willing to sacrifice everything. But what's also interesting is that we learn at the end that Martha is a rebel herself. Has Martha been talking to Andor all these years, Catherine, about rebelling, about not allowing the Empire to tell you what to do with your life? Are the Daughters of Ferrix part of the Rebel Alliance? What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure if there's an actual alliance yet. It still feels like a bunch of fractured cells. I think season 2, like one of my first predictions for the series is that it was going to be about how all these different rebel cells come together to form a cohesive unit. Because in Rogue One, it was said that Saw Gerrera was leading his own offshoot of extremists, but that was really the only offshoot. Like everybody else was kind of in the club already, so to speak, whereas there doesn't really seem to be a club yet. Like Mom Mothma is still operating out of her office on Coruscant and isn't really in the know on what's going on. Like she was kept completely in the dark as to what she was financing when she found out about the payroll heist. It wasn't until after it had already happened. So I think that the Daughters of Fair, all this stuff is going to sort of coalesce in season 2. That's where we're going to see the formation of the actual alliance.
And do you think also to this entire funeral procession at for Marva, which I thought was so beautifully done. The Empire decided to kind of have a presence there. They'd been there for a little while, so they didn't just show up that day. They'd been kind of on Ferrix. They'd captured some prisoners, and we already saw what they did to Big. And to add to that a little bit more, it looked like they had firepower with them. Why wasn't the Empire able to react to what happened? I mean, did they have a lot of altercations before this with rebels or even with anyone, or did they just assume?
Probably not. It's like I remember when they first put the garrison there and they introduced that new character I spoke of earlier who thinks he's going to get it from, oh, does that mean I'm going to go up to the corp? Like he's not thinking about the job. He's thinking about how can I move up the ladder. And so these are a bunch of people who are probably used to everybody following their orders and not giving them any trouble. And to see this kind of happening on a wide scale, there were only a couple members amongst the Imperials who were like racing to shut this down. And so everybody else was kind of taken by surprise because it's like, oh, you went to the academy and we put you in charge, but you haven't really done anything yet, you know? So that's why they're caught off guard.
Were you surprised that Cassian returned to Ferrex for Marva's funeral? I was surprised to see that. It's not that I didn't think he would want to pay respect to essentially. I certainly wouldn't have felt that way. It's just that he was a wanted man, and I thought it was, maybe crazy for him to decide to show up to Ferrex for this event, knowing that the Empire was looking for him. What did you think?
Yeah, she made it pretty clear to him the last time they saw each other that, I have to stay here. I'm tired of running and they're watching me. I'm just going to stay here. You can't come back. It's dangerous. And it's like, she's dead. So it's not like him coming back is going to do anything for her. So it is kind of, and it's not like he came back with the idea in mind that he was going to rescue his friends. It's not until everything hits the fan that he decides, oh, we got to get out of here. Because he didn't know that Bix had been imprisoned and tortured or anything like that. He kind of just stumbles into it. So yeah, I was surprised that he did come back. But then again, it's like you knew he was going to come back because the fact that they were shoehorning all the other characters back to Ferrex for the finale, it's like, okay, he's going to come back, but it's not really a smart decision character-wise.
Do you think we're going to see the altercation that happened at Spellhouse with Krieger? He was a character I was completely unfamiliar with, and I'm not sure. They wanted Bix to say that was, what was the person? Axis, the Axis person who supposedly was working with Cassian Andor, and supposedly the same person that Cyril encountered on Ferrex earlier in the series. Do you think that the Empire is convinced that they killed that member? And of course, what's great for, I guess, in a sense, the story is that since he was killed, at least from what they are implying, and his men, Dedra can never interrogate them. I think that the undercover knew that and wanted everyone to be killed, because if there was some kind of interrogation, it would just put him in more danger, him and his child. What do you think about the fact that they didn't show us the Spellhouse event? We didn't even see an explosion. It was just sort of like they told us, matter of fact, everyone in Spellhouse has been killed. And Dedra's like, well, I didn't get a chance to interrogate anybody, so how can I do an investigation if you killed this person? What did you think about the treatment there?
I think that's just probably why they did it. They deliberately killed everybody because they didn't want there to be an investigation. Because they can't, like the boss came up with this plan. We're going to kill the guy we found. We're going to leave him on the boat so that way nobody knows that we ever found out about it. And then that's going to lure him in. We're just going to kill everybody. So, yeah. And I think that we're going to learn more about that from Saw Gerrera in season 2. Because as we know, he still is reasonably well off. He's not like in that giant, iron lung type thing that he is in Rogue One. So we're going to revisit more of his storyline and probably find out more about the whole Krieger situation later on.
Well, it seems like Saw a big deal, certainly in Andor, because there was this strong desire for Luthen to recruit him to do something very specifically. And it's quite funny, Catherine, that almost at the very same moment that Saw is going to fly on over to Spellhouse, right? He was going to join Krieger there, that pops up. At least I think that's how it worked. Luthen seemed to pop up right before Saw was going to leave and join Krieger, because Saw was like, we're in, and it's like, he's like, you can't go. I mean, it was a very interesting situation. Imagine someone telling you can't go to work that day because if you do, you'll be killed. Like, this is essentially what he was doing.
Well, that was funny because, initially it was Luthen who wanted him to go work with Krieger, and it was Saw who didn't want to do it. He's like, oh, he's a separatist. He's like, you got to throw that shit out the window. But then when Luthen found out that it's a trap, he had to go back and tell Saw not to go, which is probably annoying to Saw. It's like, make up your mind.
Doesn't it tell us something about how Luthen feels about Saw? He was not in a position to tell Krieger because that would have been disastrous, but he felt he could go ahead and intercept Saw, a man whose mind you couldn't easily change, but he knew what to do in order to do this. Is as knowledgeable, or rather, is Saw as knowledgeable as Luthen? And, I guess maybe the reason why we don't hear from Luthen is because he does get killed along the way. Saw is kind of like this survivor from an era where things were not fully established by the time, let's say, particular case, I'm not even sure, but why do you think that Luthen felt he should go ahead and save Saw? It just would have made things more believable. What's so special about Saw to Luthen?
Well, because he's an extremist and he's willing to go all the way, and a lot of the other rebel factions we know don't. Like, Luthen is frustrated that Mon Mothma is upset with him for using the money to, steal the payroll. And he's like, hey, this is what we got to do. And like he says, we have to increase the suffering to start the rebellion, and Saw Gerrera is all in. So that's why he likes him.
Well, Luthen certainly did spend a lot of money on that ship that he's in. You mentioned the ship. That was not, some of the weapons on the ship are pretty amazing. And you and I did discuss this, I think, about the way that they look like lightsabers, or their specific name for that weapon on his ship, which looked really, really cool. Luthen has access to a lot of stuff. We've seen his shop, and I'm still trying to figure out why he has Jedi and Sith holocrons in his shop, but then later that they're not there anymore. I to go ahead and get artifacts. They've always been in pursuit of trying to get artifacts from different cultures. Do you think Luthen did something with these artifacts? Do you think because we haven't necessarily seen any other buyers go into his shop. And do you think that, the Empire will take everything he has eventually, now that I don't believe Luthen can return back to Coruscant, right?
Well, assuming that, I don't remember, his cover wasn't blown, was it?
It wasn't, but he tried to return to Coruscant, I believe, while he was speaking to Clea, and that huge ship, the really cool looking one with the dishes, pushed him out of the, let's say,
right. But did they know that it was him, though, that it was Luthen, or was he? Because it seemed like they were talking to the pilot. I don't remember if he called him by name, but I don't know. I mean, it seems like they threw a bunch of Easter eggs in there for the hell of it. Like, they even had stuff from Legends material in there, and I don't get the vibe that the holocrons are going to come back, because this show is sort of taking place away from all the Jedi and Sith stuff. So maybe it'll pop up, maybe not.
And my final question about this series is that, of course, it's been fantastic for me. I've enjoyed it. I'm sure you've enjoyed it. Honestly, Catherine, I think that we haven't seen anything with this quality for a long time. It's one of the few times that I saw the Death Star again, and I wasn't, annoyed by it, because seeing a second Death Star, let's say in some of the series we saw, and I said, another one, but at least in this regard, it does seem very mystical, even though we know what the Death Star can do. The development and the building of it does seem very kind of, it's fascinating, even though we've visited it before in the past, and it was a huge part of Star Wars. What were your thoughts when you saw the final scene where the Death Star, especially its weapons array, if you will, was being constructed, and that's what they were making, obviously, in Arcana 5?
It looked neat. Like I said, they put a lot of money into that shot, and it looked cool to see it again, because the whole Death Star thing has been the Manhattan Project throughout all of these other spin-off materials, basically. So they're continuing that trend.
Well, I think that for me, Andor has been such a huge success. And I say, as you said, we have 2 years to wait for Andor. Gee, it feels like forever, Catherine. What are some of the things that you think they did right in this series versus some of the other series we've been seeing, even over just this past year, where we had great expectations for those other series? They were not successful in delivering a lot of elements we'd hoped for.
Well, this show, they had a story to tell, and they wrote it from beginning to end to begin with. I'm so convinced that the only reason the Book of Boba Fett show exists is because the Disney brass forced it on them. I mean, the same writers of the first 2 seasons of Mandalorian wrote the Book of Boba Fett, and it was a significant step down in quality. Clearly, they got a mandate to shoehorn Luke, Ahsoka, Grogu, and Din Djarin back into that series, which they didn't need to be there. They completely retconned the ending of Mandalorian season 2 by shoehorning Grogu. Like, that was clearly a Disney brass, we got to sell more toys mandate that they forced on them, which is why that was a crap series. Same with Kenobi. It's like Kenobi, as we know, was gestating for a long time. At one point, it was going to be a trilogy of films, then it was going to be one movie, and then maybe a one-off. And finally, they just threw this all together, and it's like, oh, we'll just market the hell out of the idea we got Ewan and Hayden to come back. But we'll have one of our chief writers not even bother to watch Revenge of the Sith. It's like, that shows how cocky they were in thinking that, oh, well, as long as we have an established character everybody loves, it doesn't matter how crap the rest of it is, they're just going to love it. It's like, no. Whereas this is like, they took a character who, a middle tier Star Wars character, wasn't as beloved or whatever. It's like, we're going to write a story, a massive ensemble that is actually a story, and it's not built around cameos or a Star Wars iconography. And they got 2 seasons to tell this story, and they had a whole, again, other team of professionals doing it who have long experience in this industry, and all of that paid off in spades.
Yeah, it really did. Certainly I was very disappointed that they inserted Grogu into the Book of Boba Fett in that way. I felt it could have been fine for the Mandalorian for Din to show up, but not Grogu to be in school. They were trying to recapture the ending, like you said, of the Mandalorian season 2 again by showing Luke, and we know that. And I think it was a mistake. But in this particular series, I've always wanted to know what it was like to live on Coruscant. I've always wanted to know what some of these other worlds were like. Us that. I think they gave us and of course there are so many worlds, but they gave us sort of a nice little small view of what some of life might be like in the Star Wars galaxy outside of Force users. Really was remarkable what they did. I think, like what you said, those real life locations made the series feel a lot more believable. It gave an expansiveness to it. The sound effects, Catherine, I just love hearing the sound effects in the series. I thought the music was nice. My mother had actually said that the music tells the story in Andor, because she would watch it as I rewatched it over again, and she enjoyed that. I know that there haven't been a lot of aliens in it, but we have seen a few. We've seen a few, so that was also very interesting to see. And we know that the Empire's sort of machine of trying to control the galaxy is happening, and they've plundered probably quite a few worlds already at this point. Because I don't think Narkina 5 would be enough to build that Death Star. I would probably need a few more worlds, maybe 1,000
yeah, and
more.
Come to think of it, the fact that Mon Mothma and Bail Organa are still senators, and they clearly don't know about it. So they all don't know about it. So,
yeah, and it is quite a thing. I almost thought they implied that Melshi and Andor would go and let people know what's happening, but we didn't see those scenes, and they implied it. I guess it's something that will happen off camera. Who do you think, does Luthen even know? Will Andor tell Luthen about this? How do you think that's going to go down? Because does Luthen, does Saw know? Because they seem to know more things.
Yeah, he's probably going to tell Luthen about where he's been and what's been Of course, Andor doesn't know what they were building or what it was going towards, but the fact that they also implied that there used to be a civilization on the shoreline, which looks like it's been annihilated because the Empire was looking for a private place to build this thing and didn't want any other witnesses, so they just eradicated whatever civilization used to be there. And once he tells him this, Luthen, I think, would probably try and correspond with Mon Mothma about it and see, hey, have you heard about anything like this? And that's also might get the ball rolling, because by itself, while the prison series of episodes were very good in establishing how corrupt the Empire is, it's got to contribute to something on the whole with the overarching story. So I think definitely if he tells Luthen about it, Luthen's going to tell Mon Mothma about it. She's going to start putting out feelers herself, and I think that's going to also get the ball rolling in a major way for bringing about the formation of the Rebel Alliance, even though they clearly are unaware and will remain unaware of what they were actually building, because they obviously don't find out about it, as we know, until Rogue One.
Now, what's interesting about this series is that you and I talked about the pace, and some people had mixed feelings about it, and I thought once we had seen all the episodes of Andor that more people would be watching it. Seems like they've even went so far as to include the episodes on other streaming services. Gee, Catherine, I almost thought that they were going to show the Andor series on like normal broadcast television, the first 3 or 4 episodes, to get people interested, especially during the holiday season. Maybe some people want more
Well,
Star Wars, but what do you think
I
about
think
that?
they did. Well, I think they did announce that they were going to do that, weren't they? They said they're going to put it on like ABC or something like that. The first two
Yes.
episodes, try and draw people in. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's right. They said they were going to put the first 2 episodes, and I thought, no, you should put the first 3 episodes because that's, they were smart enough on Disney Plus to drop 3 episodes because they knew it took that long to reel you in. Well, they should do the same thing on network television because the first 2 might not be enough to reel people in. So they're trying to build. Well, they're trying to get subscribers back because Disney Plus has lost a lot of subscribers, and that's also part of the reason that they just kicked out their CEO and brought another one back, is they've been losing, losing money and losing subscribers and stuff like that. For all that is another whole can of worms don't need to get into. But yeah, I think that's probably why they're trying to put some of it on network TV to draw them. But in the future, I don't think that's a bad idea though to drop like the first episode, like the pilot episode of a season on network TV to try and lure people into Disney Plus subscriptions or whatnot, or the same for any streaming service, really.
Well, I consider Andor a success, and a lot of people
Yeah,
do, but some people will say no. This is a debate. Let's technically it performed to an acceptable level, but could do better. Will Andor be a sleeper hit?
yeah. Once season 2 is out, because again, I don't think the finale was very good in terms of there was really no conclusion. It just kind of ends, and so I think that taken all 3 of them taken, season 1, season 2, and Rogue One will feel, and then A New Hope is will all feel like a really great story once it's finished. So maybe it'll build viewers after that. But they're right. I mean, they're looking at the actual Nielsen ratings have been very high for all the episodes, so it's not like it's badly received. It's just I think with the previous 2 series, and then not having any of the established characters in the series. You don't have any of the cameos. You don't have lightsabers and Jedi stuff. There space battles or any of that stuff. So that's already cutting out a big chunk of your casual audience. So I think that might have something to do with it. But I think once season 2 comes along, it'll like I said, it'll build in popularity, but it'll probably take a while.
Before Andor started, I went ahead and watched Rogue One, which I think a lot of fans did. And I'm looking forward to watching seasons 1 and then 2 and then Rogue One, Catherine, for that incredible continuity going forward with the story, because it's been so good. But what are any last thoughts about season 1 that you care to share before we wrap up the show?
I really liked it. I love the slow burn approach, the emphasis on character, that they shied away from cameo, all that other type of stuff. And I hope that Andor himself plays more of a central role in the next seasons. I really like his character, and I admit it's going to be pretty jarring once we do get to watch that entire story and sequence, how he kind of becomes a supporting character in the Rogue One movie, which is his, as we know, chronologically his last appearance. So that's going to be a little weird, but I do hope he gets more time to shine in season 2. But I think this series was a win for the most part. Definitely over the previous 2 series they put out.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you. I think Andor was truly delivered. Something that I noticed, and I, to be very specific about it, was that Andor delivered pretty much what it promised. It was what it purported to be. We got this amazing story. The trailer was perfectly produced and marketed, in a certain. I feel like that trailer was reflective of exactly what they delivered in the season. But I also feel like we got a lot more when it comes to the relationships between the characters. For example, the idea that the rebels need support and need to come together, where Luthen is now going to be this person who's taken over. Martha is gone, but now Andor has Luthen, and Luthen may take that role of sort of a guide to Andor, and Andor needs a guide. He's has many talents, but sometimes he goes astray from what we've seen, and so having that influence over him could benefit him in that regard. But we also saw Dedra and Cyril now. I relationship is a bit sketchy, but after that kind of a experience, I'm wondering how this relationship will change between them. But even the empire needs people who believe in what they are doing in order to be successful. It can't sort of, just be somebody like his
No,
like Cyril's
you know,
command care.
now that you mention it, I think seeing as that there's not going to be a relationship here in the normal sense, and I don't think they're going to kill her off really quickly because she's a pretty good villain. So I think maybe she's going to use him as her kind of secret, go for secret agent assassin person when she needs to get things done, and is going to probably lead him on to think that she's more interested in him than she actually is, because you could tell she was genuinely surprised and a bit scared that he showed up there, but happy that he saved her. So I think that might be the direction that goes in season 2, but I still think that eventually it's going to backfire on her.
Yeah, it was a rocky situation from the beginning because she was very suspicious of him when she had no reason to be suspicious of Cyril. He's just this, who was unfortunately had this altercation or confrontation with Andor, but there was no reason for her to be suspicious of him. But I think that in her case, the main reason why she's really resistant to having an association with him is because his failure, and that could have an effect over the perception of her being with somebody who had such a catastrophic failure. But now that she herself this, maybe things will change for her, and he might help her. She could use him as a scapegoat. Who knows? She could say he went there to warn people that about this, or she could say whatever she wants. I don't know whether she'd be believed, but I think there is definitely some kind of, he felt that he compelled to save her, and he didn't have to save her. And so I guess he feels invested in trying to curry favor with her. And I kind of like that. We don't know what's going to happen, but he feels it was worthwhile to do it for his career or maybe his future. We're seeing a lot of these situations where people are doing this. Mon Mothma is very uncomfortable. Vel is very uncomfortable. And so they didn't necessarily leave us, like you said, think there was payoffs or that we know definitively what happened. I don't know if Mon Mothma does anything. I don't know, like her stress levels must be through the roof right now. They're already not listening to her in the Senate. Her husband isn't listening to her. Her daughter's not listening to her. And I think even Vel is going to turn her. I think Vel is probably embarrassed by the fact that Mon threw so much money at Luthen, and now Vel is upset with the whole organization. Honestly, I thought Vel was going to lend Mon Mothma the money. Why didn't Vel take some of that money and give it to Mon Mothma?
I don't know. I don't know.
But I mean, it was right. I mean, I thought that's what was going to happen, but it is what it is. But overall, this has been such an enjoyable series to watch, Catherine. And thank you so much for joining me and doing this episode 1 recap of Andor, which has been incredible. From the production, costumes were great. The locations, all the different things that we saw, these actors and the music, it's been stunning and such a great ride. I hate that we have to wait for 2 years, but that's okay. We will be patient. Catherine, where can people find you?
You can find me in the Phantasmagorium Show every Wednesday night on the Phantasmagorium Show YouTube channel. You can find me on the Virtual Cantina Network YouTube channel every second and fourth Sunday of the month at 8 a.m. Pacific, co-hosting Unifying Force, a Star Wars talk show. And you can find me at Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Slice Night.
Excellent. And guys, you can find me here on Positive Fandom. Sometimes you can find me on the 1/6 Scale Man Network. Sometimes I'm on Midnights. I'm on the Burn Network. But guys, please do like and subscribe to the channel. Please do like and subscribe to the Phantasmagorium Show, and check out where Catherine is at. And if you would like to see more, please do like and subscribe. Hit the like button. And for everybody out there, no matter where you are in the galaxy, always please do remember to be kind. Stay safe out there. Bye.